These kids smoke better dope than I do.
Tonight's video is special because at the time of the release of this, it's Friday the 13th. So I'm doing Friday the 13th part 2. I would do part 1, but in my written reviews, if you go to the website, you can read the written review for part 1 and even the remake. And that's as far as I went. So that's why I'm talking about part 2 now. But it's Friday the 13th, so I'm doing Friday the 13th part 2. And this is episode 13, so we got 13, 13, 13. If you're watching this, you like this, subscribe, because I'm getting really close to my goal of 1,000 subscribers. I have like 983 to go. So every click counts, every click helps. So this movie starts with Alice from the original, the final girl from the original. She's back home, she's in her apartment. And she's like sleeping. She has this weird thing where all her Jason encounters happen while she's asleep, sort of. Like she's sleeping in the canoe. After everything that happens, she gets in the canoe and goes to sleep. And then when she wakes up, little Jason comes, in that famous scene. And then she goes back to sleep, wakes up again, she's at the hospital, and she's like, well, what about the little boy? And they're like, we never found a little boy. So she's like, but now she's sleeping in her bed and she's having flashbacks of the night that all happened. Apparently this is just like 2 months later. They don't really make it clear, because I was watching it, I was like, when is this happening? Because they make it clear later that that how much time has passed. But when you're watching, you're like, okay. But so 2 months later, she's in her apartment, she's having these flashback dreams. And it makes me kind of wonder, like, did she happen to have the flashback dream now? Or is this how her life, is this how her sleep has been for the past 2 months that it happened? Like every night when she tries to sleep, she just has visions. Because it could be, like, even though somebody's trying to kill you, like cutting off somebody's head, that's probably traumatic. Even if the person's evil, it's like, I just cut off a person's head. So she flashes back to it, and then she wakes up and she starts walking through her house, and there's the infamous jump scare. The cat jumps through the window and she's like, ow! And you're like, what the? And it's like her cat, I guess, because after that he's totally cool. He's just like, I'm hungry. She's like, all right, whatever. But she opens her fridge, and what do you know? It's like she dreamed it into life. It's the human head. It's Mrs. Voorhees' head in her fridge, just sitting there. She's like, what? And then she can hear somebody in the house, and it's probably Jason. So he kills her, but then it gets confusing because the little kid in the lake is supposed to be Jason. Like, he didn't drown. He's just been living in the lake. I don't know. But then, like, only 2 months have passed, so now this grown man is also Jason and kills her. So it's like, well, how old is Jason? Like, that's why it's confusing, because they don't tell you how much time has passed. So you're like, well, in a couple months he grew like 10 years or 15 years? Or I don't know, it's weird, but she dies, and Mrs. Voorhees is weird to me, because it's like, she wants revenge. So it's like, it'd be like if I got fired from my job, and I was like, I don't know, bummed out about it. I was like, I'm gonna retaliate. And then 22 years later, I'm like, you know what? Fuck those guys. But I'm also friends with the owner of the company that fired me. But I'm still like, you know what? They did me wrong. I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna kill every one of those people. But 22 years has passed, so you walk in, it's not even the same crew. Like, none of the people that worked there when you worked there are there. It's just confused people, like, why? What's your deal? It's like, I'm gonna kill every one of you because I got fucked over. I got a raw deal. And like, what does that have to do with us? But she comes in, or maybe like Thursday the 12th, Mr. Voorhees was like, I've had enough of this insanity. So she's like, oh my God, my husband left me. Now what am I gonna do? I'm old. I'm not desirable anymore, and I'm never going to have sex again. But you know who is having sex? Counselors. Camp counselors. The same counselors that were having sex while my little Jason died. And then it's also weird because Mrs. Voorhees worked there while it was happening. But it's completely the counselor's fault. I don't know why that word's so hard to say. Counselor's fault. Meanwhile, she was a cook. She worked there. And it's like, okay. Because she even tells Alice, she's like, they knew he couldn't swim that well. They knew they had to look for him. It's like, why is he swimming in the first place? Where were you? I mean, it'd be one thing if like if I sent my kid off to camp and then 4 days later I get a phone call, you know, that dreaded phone call of, hey, we have terrible news. Something happened to your kid. He drowned. I'd be like, I'd be horrified. But like, you were there. You knew everybody involved. Like what? But instead she's like, it's all their fault. It's like, you were the cook. You were there. You could, like, were you cooking? You were cooking. They were having sex. Jason's out swimming. Like, it sounds like Jason snuck off. He's like, I'm going to do what I want to do. Sounds like Jason kind of got what he's doing. He learned a hard lesson. We don't all bounce back from those hard lessons. Just saying. I don't know what to deal with. I mean, obviously she's crazy. She loved her son. She's crazy. It is kind of weird because this movie predates Nightmare on Elm Street by like, I don't know, a good 3 years. So it's kind of funny how Alice's, her memories are all dream sequences of like meeting Jason, and then we open it up with her like looking back, recapping the original movie. Basically, that's what they were doing. They did that to recap the original movie. But it's so like stuff like happening in her dream that ended up happening in real life. I mean, it is kind of like the Freddy Krueger thing where it's like, what happened when he kills you in your dream, you die in real life. Except that this movie was first. And there's also, because Wes Craven had said, I've heard, that that's the point of having the final girl in the next movie and killing her off right away, is to let the audience know that all bets are off. Nobody's safe. Anybody can die. Don't get attached to these characters, because just because a person made it all the way through one movie, when the sequel comes out, doesn't mean they're gonna, you know, there's gonna be 10, 13 Jason movies. Doesn't mean this person, doesn't mean Alice gets to live through all of them. And if she doesn't get to live through all of them, probably nobody gets to live through all of them. So it turns out it is 5 years later. This group of teens led by Paul, they're sitting around a campfire, and it would have been nice if they would have done the footer note across the bottom, like 5 years later. You know, like a lot of movies do. A lot of horror movies start out, especially 80s horror movies, starts out with, there's a scene, something bad happens, somebody gets killed, the opening credits go, and then there's a caption at the bottom that says 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, 50, whatever. But they're sitting around the campfire, and he's telling the story of Jason. He's explaining that whole, he's recapping the first movie and explaining it and going on. So he's kind of the one that lets you know that 2 months later, Alice disappeared. Like, he's kind of setting the timeline. You don't really know what the timeline is unless you listen to the story that he's telling, because as he recaps it, he explains that what happened that we just saw with Alice happened 2 months after the first movie, and now what's happening happens 5 years after the first movie. Another Nightmare on Elm Street parallel, because Nightmare on Elm Street 1 was made 1 year before the sequel, but the sequel of Nightmare on Elm Street 1, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, takes place 5 years later also. No coincidence, but it's kind of weird to watch a movie. It's like, this was made a year later, and 5 years have passed. I don't know. I mean, I'm impressed that, like, you know, we came out with this movie in 1980. We didn't know how to do. And then in 1981, we're like, sequel, because this movie is actually pretty solid. Like, you watch it and it's like, it's not the best movie ever made, but it's pretty solid. I mean, it covers all the bases. There were times I was hoping to find some holes, because holes are what makes stuff funny when you're explaining shit. But it's like, this movie covers the bases pretty well. Especially for, like, they wrote it and filmed it and all that in less than a year. That's good. Paul has made it clear that It's an urban legend. It never happened. There was no Jason. There was no Alice. There was no Mrs. Voorhees. There's nothing to worry about. It's just a scary story that he's telling around the campfire. And the next scene, we see that Crazy Ralph, the Harbinger from the original, is back. And he's riding the same bike. Because I was thinking he died in the original, but I guess he didn't. Because the following night, all the teens, all the pre-counselors, they're hanging out in like the main clubhouse thing, and Ginny's our new like main girl, and she's got a little thing with Paul, which the age thing on this is weird, but now that I know they're all planning to be counselors, it's like okay, but like Paul's like kind of the older guy. He's not super old. He's like probably early 20s, and the rest of them are probably like 18, and so she's like, well, I think I'm going to turn in. And so she walks over to her cabin, and all the windows are open, and she's changing her clothes, and you can see the POV from the woods. And I think at this point you can already hear the but it's just Paul, you know, your standard 80s slasher, trick the viewer. It's like Paul shows up and he's like, hey, and that's when you officially find out they have a little thing going and they start making out and stuff. But then you hear there's still a POV outside, and you hear that and by this time they show who the next person watching. It's Crazy Ralph. Crazy Ralph is out there. And then he's watching, they're doing their thing in there. But then Crazy Ralph meets Bob Wire. It's kind of a lame death for a character that like came all the way over. I mean, Alice got a better death than him. And for Crazy Ralph to be the suspect in the original, which I kind of wonder, it's like, because Crazy Ralph in the original warned them that something would happen. He warned the original counselors that if you go there, like bad shit's gonna go down. But how did he know? Because it opens up with like Jason had died and 2 counselors get killed. Then it forwards to like 1980, and they're going, and it's already called Camp Blood, even though only like 2 people died. It's reopened, and he's warning people, if you go there, you're gonna die. Maybe that was the first open. I don't know. Someday I'll do a video for the first one. They're not actually at Camp Blood in this one, you know, Crystal Lake, but they're near it. I forget the name of what they are. They're near it. They've been warned that if they go, like, it's not too far of a hike over to Camp Blood, but they've been warned not to go there, and they'll get in trouble if they go there. But Jeff and Sandra, mainly Sandra, she's like, we need to go over there. We should go over there and check that out. And Jeff's like, I don't really want to. She's like, what are you, sissy? What are you, a sissy boy? You a sissy boy? You don't want to go over there? What are you, scared? What do you think, Jason's real? We should go. And he's like, doesn't want to look like a bitch. Like a bitch. So he's like, all right, we'll go. So they go. And wisely, they go in the day's light. They head over and they're looking, but then they get stopped. And it's like your typical POV. It's like, but they do find what looks like a dead dog. Muffin, Terry's dog. And they're like, wow, it looks like an animal attacked or something. And they do show a part where like Muffin runs into Jason. It's like, did Jason kill that dog? But they're like, I think it got attacked by another dog or like a wild animal. But they agree. They're like, well, I don't want to tell Terry that. Let her just think that Muffin's just out there running around and he'll come back. So they go and they're walking around, and a cop stops them. He's like, what are you guys doing? You guys know you can't be out here. So he takes them to the station, and they get in trouble. And after the cop releases them, for some reason, he decides to head to Crystal Lake. Camp Blood. And he gets out of his car and he starts walking around, and he sees what looks like a person, because basically it's his job to arrest anybody that comes anywhere near Camp Crystal Lake, because it's off limits, because, you know, people got, there was a killing spree 5 years ago. So he gets out and he starts following, the figure that he saw. And he comes up to this shack, and the shack cracks me up because the shack is like, basically, it's like Jason's house, which is funny to me. Granted, in this movie, this is the installment where he was the most human. But it is still funny to think, because you're used to him being like this supernatural thing that just kind of appears and then disappears. Like, if he's behind you, you're like, oh shit, it's Jason. And then you run, and you're hauling ass, like, did I lose him? And you look back, and he's not there. And then you look forward, and he's right in front of you. You're like, how did he do that? It's like, and he's walking the whole time. Like, no matter how fast you run, he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna kill you. You know I'm going to. I wear 2 watches. And then he appears right in front of you. He's like this supernatural thing. But it's funny because they show this shack. And it's like, he lives here. He has a home. He's not just something that appears. Because like with Freddy's like, he's in your dreams. He doesn't live anywhere. But the idea of Jason, like, I don't know, because Jason doesn't kill his victims and eat them. So at some point, it's like, okay, here's your place. And they show his toilet. He's not a good housekeeper, but there's like a bed. So it's like, it's okay. At some point, Jason has to decide like, oh, I'm tired. It's time to go to sleep. He doesn't eat people, so it's like, I need food. I better go grocery shopping. It's like he becomes more human by having this little shack. It's like, what the hell? Jason is like, has a home. It's weird. But Jason catches the cop in his home, and he comes up from behind him with the claw hammer and just right in the back of the cop's head. Cop gone. He dead. It's the last night before the official like counselor boot camp starts. So a bunch of the group decide they're going to go into town and go to the local bar and get drunk.
Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs.
And then a few of the other people decide, I don't want to. Like, Jeff and Sandra aren't allowed to go because they got picked up by the cops earlier. That's their punishment. But then other people were like, I don't really want to go either. So most people go, a few people stay behind. Terry being one of the people that stay behind because she hasn't seen her dog in hours. So she's like, I'm going to go look for my dog. And she decides, I'm going to go by myself and look for my dog. I don't even think she told anybody. She just starts going, she goes for a walk wearing like nothing, wearing tight shorts and a really like tight half shirt. She's like, I'm going to go find my dog. And she goes for a walk. She gets to a lake. I don't know if it's Crystal Lake or not. But then she takes her clothes off. It's like, I'm going to go skinny dipping. It's like, I don't know, it's dark. I don't know what time it is. It's got to be at least 10 because it's probably summertime. She takes off all of her clothes, walks into the water, and then you see like a hand take her clothes. Which would be funny if it was Jason. Like, I want to kill her, but first I want to see her get out of the water naked, so I'm going to hide her clothes. But takes her clothes, and then she gets out and says, where are my clothes? She looks over and it turns out it's Steve, who's kind of like her love interest, and he's like, we gotcha. And somehow she has a towel. A towel appears kind of out of nowhere because it didn't look like she was like, I'm going to go to the lake and go skinny dipping. It looks like I'm going to look for my dog. But then she gets to the lake and goes skinny dipping. She comes out, she gets her clothes, and suddenly she has a towel. Like, where did the towel come from? And Steve didn't know she was going to go skinny dipping, so it's not like he'd be like, oh, she probably needs a towel. I better go get to her. But she gets out, and they're walking, and Steve steps into a rope trap. Like the rope that hangs down from a tree, and there's like a little lasso circle on the ground. This is really a big thing in like the early 80s. Like, as a kid, I thought at some point in my life I would step into one of these and be hanging upside down from a tree, just because they seem so It's like, well, that just happens. I mean, people are putting these things everywhere. You know, it's like I'm gonna get in a rope trap, based on the TV I watched as a kid, from like late '60s, '70s, and early '80s shows. I thought for sure, by the time I'm an adult, by the time I'm the age now, I'm gonna step in a rope trap and be hanging upside down from a tree, waiting for somebody to save me. I'm gonna step in quicksand, and probably a bear is gonna attack me at some point. I don't even know where I'd be where the bear came and attacked me, but probably gonna happen. So she tells him, she's like, well, I'm gonna go get a knife. So I'll be right back.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back.
But by the time she gets back, it's too late. Jason already got him. Somehow Jason knew that the trap had been triggered, and he comes up, and it's funny because like they show Jason slash his throat, and he totally uses the wrong side of the machete to slash his throat. But she comes back and she's like, ah! And then she runs back to the main, to like the clubhouse. I don't remember what happened to her. Did she? I'm sure she died, but I'm trying to remember how she did. Meanwhile, at the bar, Ginny is sitting with Paul and Ted, and they start talking about Jason, and Ginny starts getting like, because she believes Jason's real, and she's like sitting around like being an empath, just like that poor kid. And she's like, his mom was all he had. He was this kid, and he lived out there, and he grew up with his mom. He wasn't around other people, even though he was at camp. It's like, well, he's at camp, so he was around other people. And she's like, he probably had no concept of death, and so like his mom getting killed must have devastated. He must have watched it. Like she starts accessing all these things, and she's like also explaining the plot to the viewer. She's basically telling the story to the viewers. Like, Jason watched his mom die, even though like, well, if he did, and he was like, I don't know, wearing up, and you know, if he's the same dude that killed Alice and not a little kid that attacked her in the boat, then, and he knew his mom, I don't know, so like he secretly was spying on his mom, and mom's doing all this weird shit, and he's just like, oh, mom's killing people. Instead of being like, hey, I didn't die. You don't have to, none of this is necessary. I'm cool, I'm okay. So, I don't know, that part gets weird. Because it's like, okay, that makes sense. That goes motive. Because it's like, mom went on a killing spree to get revenge on counselors who were too busy having sex and whatever to protect her kid. So now she's killing them all. But then in the process, she gets killed. Now, killed son, is going after counselors for killing his mom. He's getting revenge on the counselors that killed his mom, while she was getting revenge on the counselors that got him killed. It's very intricate. Paul and Ted just dismiss her. They're just like, what are you talking about? You believe that? Like, we think you're drunk. It's a legend. It didn't happen, and that kind of pisses her off. Back at the main like clubhouse, because there are rooms upstairs, Jeff and Sandra decide they're gonna go upstairs and get it on. They're gonna make whoopee, as they would say on the Newlywed Game back in the day.
Number 1, you can never have sex.
Scooter and Vicky stay downstairs. They're playing little video games, like those handheld early 80s, like really crappy games. They got hockey and they got football, and they're playing those. And then they decide they're gonna get it on too. But first, Vicky has to run to her cabin because she's not staying in the clubhouse. She's gonna run to her cabin and slip into something more comfortable, as they used to say in the 80s. And before leaving says, I'll be right back.
I'll be right back.
Okay, she goes back to her cabin. She puts on her fancy brown underwear. But while she's doing this, Scooter hears something outside, and Scooter's in a wheelchair. Scooter hears something outside, and he gets a machete in the face. The right side this time, and then he goes like down a flight of stairs. So, yeah, Jason's at the clubhouse. Jason, after killing Scooter, he goes upstairs where Jeff and Sandra just got done having sex, and he comes in, he grabs a spear. There's a spear like holding, there's a mask propped up that you'll notice in the beginning of the movie. Turns out he throws a mask in it, there's like a spear, and he grabs that and he walks up the stairs because he doesn't have a machete anymore. It's over in Scooter's face, and he was too lazy to walk down there and get it. So he's like, spear, cool. And he walks in the room, and they hear something like, and Sandra's on her back, so she's looking up. She can see Jason. She's like, but Jeff is in no position to, like, he's not an owl. He's like, what? And Jason just puts a spear right through both of them, gets some double penetration all the way through down to the floorboard. And so finally, Vicky makes her way back over, and she walks in, and she's like, where's Scooter? She wanders around the house and goes directly into Jeff and Sandra's room. I guess it's probably Sandra's room. It's not both their room. They weren't. It's kind of sneaky to where you can't. It wasn't a couples counselor, boot camp. So they're just kind of meeting. I don't know, how did they all know each other private? It's like you guys all just met that afternoon. We're like, all right, we're hooking up. We're hooking up. We're hooking up. We're hooking up. Because some of them were slower, but like Jeff and Sandra, they showed up together. So she goes in there, and the blanket's like on the bed, and you can tell somebody's in the bed. So she's like, Sandra, and she pulls it back, and it's Jason. Except it's not hockey mask Jason. It's one-eyed, the town that dreaded sundown Jason. He's like, oh, and she screams. And then Sandra's corpse is next to him because she saw there were two people in the bed. She could make out there were two people in the bed, just not who they were because they were covered with a sheet. So she's like, there's a corpse. And then she turns and finds like Jeff's corpse hanging, and so she's like freaks out, and you think she's gonna get out of there, but then he's got a butcher knife. He does use quite the array of weapons in this movie, and he stabs her in the stomach, and now she dead. I liked Vicky. She was cool. Fucking Jason. Ginny and Paul come back from the bar, and they go in the house. They start looking around, and all the lights are out, and they're like, oh, this is weird. And they can't find anybody, because everybody who's been killed has been kind of killed elsewhere, except for the people upstairs. And finally, when they get upstairs, Ginny meets Jason, and he starts to attack her, but Paul interferes. So Paul and Jason tussle a little bit, and then like Jason takes out Paul, and it's unclear. It's like, did he kill him? Because it didn't look like Jason had a weapon. I think he had a weapon, but it looked like Paul, because Paul kind of like sneak attacked him because he's going for Ginny, and Paul's like, bitch. But then Paul's just out, and now it's just Ginny versus Jason, and Ginny's like, I'm fucking out of here. Because Ginny, so empathetic earlier, like Jason, the poor guy, blah, blah, but then something happens to Paul. She's like, oh, poor Paul, I should take care. Nope, gone. She runs out the door. She gets in her car. Now her car won't start. She was having car trouble earlier. Paul fixed it for her, but she managed to get, to the bar and back, but now it won't start, which is probably a good thing, because she probably shouldn't be drinking and driving anyway. But she's got to get her way out, and Jason's now around the car, or he's near the car, so she kicks the door open into Jason, and Jason falls down. It's so funny, the difference between Jason in part 2 versus like all the other Jasons. It's like he's such a bitch in this movie. He catches up to her because he can't even do the walk. Like he's actually, in this movie, he actually has to run after her. And so he catches up to her and she just kicks him in the balls. And he just drops like a normal person. He's just like, oh! So she takes off and she runs And he keeps running and she gets to the shack. She gets all the way to Jason's house. She didn't really realize it's Jason's house until she walks in. She walks in and there's like this shrine. It's like the candles are lit in a circle around his mom's head. And then like her sweater that she was wearing in the original is laid out underneath, like almost like a weird, like she's laying on a bed, but it's like her head. And so she's like, what the fuck? She's like, oh, that is Jason. Jason's real. That's the mom. She makes the connections, but then she can hear Jason's like really close. So somehow she gets the brilliant idea, because it is a brilliant idea. She's like, I'm going to put on Jason's mom's sweater, and I'm going to act like I'm Jason's mom. And then he's going to back down. So she puts the sweater on. It's kind of funny though, because like, did Jason's mom only wear one sweater? She had one outfit, so it's like, oh, where's my mom? Blue sweater, blue sweater, blue sweater. Not blue, blah. There's mom. She didn't have anything else, but she puts the sweater on. And Jason comes in, and she's like, Jason, it's me, Mom. What are you doing? And Jason's like, huh? Like, I think he was even cocking his head like a dog. Where he's like, Mom? I was avenging you. You're alive? No, now I feel like a dick. I've been killing all these people getting revenge, and you've been alive the whole time. Oh, and she's like, yeah, kneel down. Kneel down, Jason. It's over. There's no reason to do all that stuff. And he's like, okay, I'm going to kneel down now. But then she makes the mistake. She moves just a little bit. Like, see this face right behind me? Pretend that's Jason's mom's head on the shrine. She's like, Jason, yeah, Jason. And then she goes like this. And Jason sees her face behind her. He's like, wait a minute. You're not my mom. And she's like, shit. She's going to have him kneel down and she's just going to fucking chop his head open. But then he gets up and he blocks it. Her and Jason struggle. But then who shows up? Paul. Paul's still alive. Paul, like, starts struggling with Jason. And that's when she grabbed his machete. It's like the same machete that was in Scooter's face. Like, how many machetes do you have? Because at no point, if you would gotten that out of Scooter's face, you would have had it to use on Vicky earlier. So he just has another machete, but she finds it, and Jason and Paul are struggling. So she comes up behind, just like as hard as she can, just machetes him like right here, and the machete goes all the way down to here. Like, she acted good, and then he just kind of falls, and they're like, oh, well, that's over. Of course, they don't bother to make sure he's dead. They don't like pull the machete out and then like stab him in vital organs or anything, or chop his head off and put it next to Mom's. Now they're like, all right, let's go back to the clubhouse. So they go back to the clubhouse, still trying to figure out like what happened to everybody else? Is everybody else dead? And they're in there. Then they hear like a noise at the door. They're like, what is that? And it's kind of like, uh-oh, it's the final scare. So they open the door. It's fucking Muffin. Muffin's alive the whole time. Scratching at the door like, hey, I don't know who the dog that got killed earlier was, but they're like, oh, Muffin. Which is weird because they didn't even know that there was a chance Muffin was dead or lost or anything, but they're really glad to see Muffin. I guess if it's a choice between some dog and a like immortal serial killer, anything's better than seeing the immortal serial killer. But they're like, oh, Muffin. And then boom, through the big window right behind Ginny is Jason. Crashes in.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
And then she like wakes up and it's the next day and she's on a stretcher and they wheel her into the ambulance. And that's the end of the movie. So it's like, well, what happened to Paul? What happened to Jason? It definitely leaves it open for part 3 to explain that. It was like, how come there always has to be another movie to explain the first movie? But I don't know. The Badass Award definitely goes to Ginny, because Ginny was smart enough to. Part of being the badass is being aware that shit is going on around you. That way you can like kind of be on guard and prepare for it. When you're one of the guys like Paul and Ted, who props to Ted for going to an after hours party and surviving. He needs his own spin-off movie, but it's probably too late because that movie's like almost 40 years old, if not 40. But she was the one who's like figuring stuff out. Her wheels were turning. Like, you weren't gonna sneak up on Ginny because Ginny already knew. Ginny, like when she saw Jason the first time, as surprised she wasn't that surprised. She wasn't as surprised as somebody else would have been had they been the ones to, well, like the people that die. Well, I guess people that didn't. Vicky is the only one that really saw Jason well before getting killed, and was like, oh, you're supposed to be a legend. And so she froze instead of being able to fight back and do anything about it. Whereas Ginny was like, bitch, I knew you were real. I was waiting for this to happen. I'm gonna go get in my car that won't start. So she gets the award. And it sucks because I'm only 13 episodes in, because watching this made me want to like, it's like, now I want to watch and review the rest of them. Maybe go back and do the first one. But I don't know, you can't like be 12 episodes in and then do the next 12 are going to be Friday the 13th. So someday, maybe, I don't know, definitely every Friday the 13th, I'm going to drop a Friday the 13th movie. And so I guess the final question is, what did we learn?
Survival tips. Don't go skinny dipping in the middle of the night. Don't cuddle after sex. Don't hide in a way that makes it impossible to see what's going on around